Behind the glittering marquees and dazzling premieres of old Hollywood lay a labyrinth of darkness that few dared to expose. While millions dreamed of the glamorous life portrayed on silver screens, the reality behind those dreams was far more sinister. In the golden age of cinema, when stars seemed to float above mere mortals, a machinery of control, exploitation, and cruelty operated in the shadows. From the painful transformation of young talents into manufactured icons, to the systematic destruction of personal freedom, Hollywood's dream factory was, in truth, a nightmare for many who lived within its gilded cage. Today, we pull back the velvet curtain to reveal 5 of the most shocking truths about old Hollywood. Stories of broken lives, shattered dreams, and the dark price of fame that the studio system never wanted you to know. Beauty pressures, the dark side of Hollywood glamour. In Golden Age, Hollywood, beauty wasn't just an asset. It was a ruthless machine that ground down actresses with devastating efficiency. The story of Judy Garland stands as perhaps the most heartbreaking testament to this systematic destruction. From age 13, MGM Studios subjected her to a brutal regime of diet pills and amphetamines, with studio executives cruelly nicknaming her Little Hunchback and monitoring every morsel that passed her lips. Louis B. Mayer himself would order his staff to restrict her to chicken soup and cigarettes while filming The Wizard of Oz, leading to lifelong battles with eating disorders and addiction that would ultimately contribute to her early death. Even the industry's most celebrated beauty icons weren't immune. Marilyn Monroe's transformation from brunette Norma Jean to the blonde bombshell we know today came at a devastating physical and emotional cost. Studio documents revealed she endured excruciating 9-hour bleaching sessions every 3 weeks, multiple secret plastic surgeries, including nose refinements and chin implants, and was pressured to maintain her famous 36-24-36 measurements through dangerous crash dieting. Her makeup artist, Alan Whitey Snyder, would spend hours each morning applying precise layers of Vaseline and powder to create her signature glowing skin, while she endured painful hormone cream treatments to maintain her facial peach fuzz for that soft focus look on camera. The pressure didn't spare aging actresses either. Joan Crawford, desperate to maintain her leading lady status, would undergo painful facial tightening treatments that involved running electrical currents through her face. She would also wrap her face in tape before bed, pulling her skin back so tightly she could barely close her eyes. Gloria Swanson was subjected to early experimental facelifts that left her with permanent nerve damage, while Rita Hayworth underwent painful electrolysis to raise her hairline by an inch because studios deemed her natural features too ethnic. The studios maintained this control through ironclad contracts that dictated everything from weight clauses to mandatory beauty treatments. MGM's infamous Glamour Factory would completely remake actresses, fixing imperfect teeth, dyeing hair, and even surgically altering facial features, all while promoting these transformed women as natural beauties. Young starlets like Elizabeth Taylor and Ava Gardner were weighed weekly, with even minor weight gains resulting in harsh penalties and public humiliation. This obsession with physical perfection created a toxic legacy that haunted many of these women until their deaths. Veronica Lake, once famous for her peekaboo hairstyle, died nearly unrecognizable and impoverished, having struggled with mental health issues stemming from years of studio-mandated starvation diets and amphetamine use. Gene Tierney's studio-enforced beauty regimens, including dangerous diet pills and early plastic surgery procedures, contributed to her severe mental breakdown in the 1950s. These weren't isolated incidents, but rather symptoms of an industry that viewed women's bodies as commodities to be shaped, controlled, and discarded once they no longer fit the mold of impossible perfection. Contract system, Hollywood's golden handcuffs. The notorious studio contract system of old Hollywood operated like a sophisticated form of indentured servitude. with actors essentially signing away their professional and personal autonomy for the chance at stardom. The case of Bette Davis provides one of the most dramatic illustrations of this system's iron grip. In 1936, she dared to challenge Warner Brothers by fleeing to England to make films, only to be hunted down and dragged back to Hollywood through an unprecedented international legal battle. The British courts ruled against her, setting a devastating precedent that would keep actors chained to their studios for decades to come. James Cagney's battle with Warner Brothers reveals the financial exploitation at the heart of the system. Despite being one of their biggest stars, Cagney discovered he was being forced to make up to 8 films per year while the studio pocketed the lion's share of profits. When he protested, the studio suspended him without pay and planted negative stories about him in the press. His contract even dictated what he could say publicly about the dispute, a common clause that effectively silenced actors from exposing studio abuses. The case of Olivia de Havilland exposed another insidious aspect of these contracts. Studios would routinely add suspension time to contract lengths. If an actor refused a role or took sick leave, that time was added to their contract term. When de Havilland challenged this practice in court in 1943, she discovered Warner Brothers had extended her 7-year contract to nearly 10 years through accumulated suspension time. Her eventual victory in de Havilland law case was groundbreaking, but it came at a heavy cost. The studio blacklisted her for nearly 2 years. MGM's treatment of Mickey Rooney exemplified how the system exploited child actors. Signed at age 14, Rooney was forced to work 14-hour days, given amphetamines to maintain his energy, and saw very little of his earnings, which were controlled by both the studio and his stepfather. By the time he gained independence from his contract, most of his childhood earnings had vanished. Similar stories plagued child stars like Jackie Coogan, whose case eventually led to the Coogan Law protecting child actors' earnings. The human cost of this system was perhaps best illustrated by the tragic case of Judy Garland. Her MGM contract, signed when she was just 13, gave the studio unprecedented control over every aspect of her life, from what she ate to who she dated. When she began showing signs of psychological distress from their brutal regimen of diet pills and exhausting work schedules, the studio simply upped her medication and kept cameras rolling. By the time MGM finally released her from her contract in 1950, she had suffered multiple nervous breakdowns and attempted suicide, all while being painted by the studio publicity machine as difficult and unstable. This wasn't just a contract dispute. It was a systematic destruction of a young woman's life, all in service of studio profits and control. Child labor issues, Hollywood's youngest victims. The exploitation of child actors in old Hollywood represents one of the industry's darkest chapters, with Jackie Coogan's story serving as its defining cautionary tale. After earning an estimated $4 million as a child star, equivalent to roughly $60 million today, working alongside Charlie Chaplin, Coogan discovered at age 21 that his mother and stepfather had legally spent nearly all his earnings. When he sued them in 1938, his mother's infamous response, "No promises were ever made to give Jackie anything. Every dollar a kid earns before he is 21 belongs to his parents," shocked the nation and eventually led to the California Child Actors Bill, also known as the Coogan Law. Behind the scenes, studios employed horrifically cruel methods to extract emotional performances from child actors. The treatment of Margaret O'Brien, MGM's child wonder, exemplifies this barbarism. To make her cry for a scene in 1944's Meet Me in St. Louis, directors told the 7-year-old that her dog had been killed and that the police had shot her beloved dog's corpse multiple times. When she broke down in hysterics, they captured their perfect take. Similarly, during the filming of The Good Earth, 4-year-old Shirley Temple was emotionally manipulated by a director who took away her beloved doll and ripped its head off to elicit tears. The notorious black box punishment system while rarely discussed in official studio histories, was a terrifying reality for many child actors. This disciplinary method involved locking difficult children in a dark soundproof box with a block of ice for extended periods. Both Baby Peggy, Diana Sarah Carey, and Junior Durkin reported being subjected to this treatment when they struggled with their lines or showed signs of fatigue. Baby Peggy, who began her career at 19 months old, later revealed that this torture device was kept on multiple studio lots and served as a constant threat to keep child actors compliant. The working conditions for child actors routinely violated basic labor standards, even after the introduction of protective legislation. Dickie Moore's detailed accounts of his time as a child actor revealed how studios circumvented education requirements by hiring tutors who were actually production assistants. These tutors would simply sign off on educational requirements while children worked 14-hour days. Elizabeth Taylor, who began her career at MGM at age 9, later described working such long hours that she would fall asleep between takes, only to be woken by having ice water thrown in her face to continue filming. Perhaps most disturbing was the widespread use of drugs to maintain child actors' energy levels during these grueling schedules. Baby Leroy was regularly given alcohol-laced milk to make him more compliant during filming, while Judy Garland was given amphetamines and barbiturates by age 13, beginning a studio-sanctioned pattern of drug use that would plague her entire life. Mickey Rooney later revealed that MGM regularly provided children with pep pills in the morning and sedatives at night, creating addicts before they even reached their teens. The studio system viewed child actors not as minors requiring protection, but as valuable commodities to be exploited until they aged out of their marketable roles, leaving behind a legacy of traumatized former child stars and shattered young lives. Studio surveillance, Hollywood's web of betrayal. The studio system's obsession with controlling their stars extended far beyond the movie sets, creating an Orwellian surveillance network that would rival any police state. MGM's notoriously ruthless head of publicity, Howard Strickling, maintained a complex web of informants that included hotel staff, restaurant workers, and even stars' personal servants, all feeding information back to the studio about their clients' private lives. This network was so extensive that when Clark Gable had a car accident in 1933 that killed a pedestrian, MGM's fixers arrived at the scene before the police, ensuring the incident would be kept out of the papers. Judy Garland's experience with studio surveillance was particularly devastating. Her most trusted confidant during her teenage years at MGM, a woman named Betty Asher, who posed as her personal assistant and friend, was actually a studio plant reporting directly to Louis B. Mayer. For years, Asher detailed every aspect of Garland's private life: her romantic interests, her struggles with diet pills, her emotional breakdowns. When Garland eventually discovered this betrayal, it contributed significantly to her lifelong trust issues and paranoia. The revelation that even her most intimate conversations had been fodder for studio reports shattered her already fragile psyche. The physical surveillance was equally intrusive. Jean Harlow's home, like many star residences, was fitted with hidden microphones in every room, including her bedroom. The recordings were used not just to monitor her behavior, but as leverage to ensure compliance with studio demands. When she began a relationship the studio disapproved of, mysteriously detailed transcripts of her private conversations would appear on studio executives' desks. The studio's surveillance extended to medical care, with many stars required to use studio-approved doctors who reported back to management. When Montgomery Clift began showing signs of prescription drug dependency, his studio-assigned physician continued supplying him with medications while simultaneously informing Paramount about his deteriorating condition. Rather than intervening to help, the studio used this information to adjust filming schedules and insurance policies. This medical surveillance was particularly insidious for actresses, who found their most intimate health information, including pregnancies, abortions, and mental health struggles, documented in studio files and used as leverage in contract negotiations. Even romantic relationships weren't safe from studio interference. When Lana Turner began dating Tyrone Power, MGM had both their phones tapped and assigned friends to report on their dates. The studio eventually engineered their breakup by manipulating their shooting schedules and planting negative stories about each other in gossip columns. This level of control over personal relationships was justified by the studios as protecting their investments, but it created an atmosphere of constant paranoia among the stars, who never knew which of their confidants might be reporting back to the front office. The psychological toll of living under such constant surveillance contributed to the substance abuse, mental health issues, and broken relationships that characterized so many Hollywood careers of the era. Thomas Edison, the tyrannical father of American cinema. Thomas Edison's grip on early American cinema represents a lesser-known but pivotal dark chapter in Hollywood's formation, marked by monopolistic control and outright thuggery. Through his motion picture patents company, MPPC, nicknamed the Edison Trust, he wielded his patents like weapons, creating a reign of terror that would ultimately drive the birth of Hollywood itself. The notorious Black Maria, Edison's first film studio in New Jersey, wasn't just a pioneering facility. It was the headquarters of what amounted to a protection racket for the entire early film industry. Edison's patent enforcement methods went far beyond legal challenges. He employed a network of thugs who would sabotage film productions using unlicensed equipment. These enforcers would storm movie sets, destroying cameras and film stock, and sometimes physically assaulting filmmakers who dared to operate independently. Independent producers began filming with armed guards present, keeping getaway cars running during shoots, and developing elaborate warning systems to alert them of approaching Edison agents. One producer, William Selig, reportedly had his entire studio burned to the ground after refusing to pay Edison's exorbitant licensing fees. The exodus to California wasn't merely about finding year-round filming weather. It was a desperate flight from Edison's reach. Los Angeles's distance from Edison's New Jersey base made it harder for his enforcers to track down independent producers. The city's proximity to Mexico proved crucial, as filmmakers could quickly escape across the border with their equipment when Edison's men were reported in the area. Carl Laemmle, who would later found Universal Studios, became a master at this cat-and-mouse game, frequently moving his operations between Chicago, New York, and finally California to stay one step ahead of Edison's enforcement squads. Edison's monopolistic practices extended beyond equipment to control every aspect of filmmaking. His company dictated not just who could make films, but what kinds of films could be made, how long they could be, and where they could be shown. The MPPC enforced strict rules on film content, limiting creative expression, and forcing filmmakers to adhere to Edison's conservative artistic vision. Independent theaters showing unlicensed films would find their film supplies mysteriously destroyed or their projectionists threatened with violence. This stranglehold on distribution meant that many innovative early films were lost or never made. The 1915 federal court decision that finally broke Edison's monopoly revealed the extent of his control. Court documents showed that the MPPC had seized over 2,000 independent cameras, destroyed countless reels of film, and effectively blacklisted hundreds of industry professionals who had dared to challenge its authority. The ruling came too late for many pioneering filmmakers whose careers and innovations had been crushed under Edison's heel. However, it freed the industry to evolve into what we now know as Hollywood. Though the irony remains that the film capital of the world was built by fugitives fleeing from the very man who helped create the medium. Edison's legacy in film history thus stands as a cautionary tale about how innovation and creativity can be stifled by monopolistic control and brute force. As the final credits roll on these dark chapters of Hollywood's golden age, we're left with the sobering reality that many of our most beloved icons were, in truth, casualties of a merciless system. From Judy Garland's stolen childhood to the countless stars who lived in fear of studio surveillance, their stories remind us that glamour often masks profound pain. The Hollywood Dream Factory was built on broken spirits, manipulated lives, and silenced voices. While the studio system eventually crumbled, its legacy of trauma echoed through generations of entertainers. These weren't just cautionary tales. They were real lives, real suffering, real people who paid the ultimate price for our entertainment. As we continue to celebrate their artistry and performances, let us also remember their humanity and the courage it took to survive in an industry that treated them not as artists, but as commodities to be controlled, exploited, and discarded.